parts of me that realize, hey, we can focus on the bigger strategy picture versus over optimizing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Paid Search NYC podcast. Very excited today to be joined by Tim Jensen, who is Marketing Paid Media Lead at M&T Bank in Albany, New York. Tim's also a regular contributor to Search Engine Land, Search Engine Journal. It's very much a thought leader in the space. So great to have you on and welcome.
Yeah, great to be with you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So the subject we want to get into today is the pros and cons of agency versus in-house. Very common debate. I think I've had this debate 2 or 3 times just this week, actually. So it's never far from people's minds. I myself just celebrated 8 years at the current agencies I'm at, so I'm probably more the agency side of the discussion. You, however, have worked agency and in-house in sort of recent history, and we'll get into that. So very keen to hear your perspective. Perhaps before we do that, let's start at the beginning. So where did you get your first break into paid media or paid search?
Sure. So I had graduated from college with a degree in mass media, kind of with a journalism emphasis. So I knew at that point, generally, I was interested in the marketing realm of things, didn't know what direction I wanted to take that in. And then I managed to get a job as an assistant account manager at an agency in my local area that dealt with primarily car dealerships. So within 2 months or so of me starting there, the main person that handled paid search, paid media there was a small agency. So it was basically one person doing that. That person left. So I was asked, hey, was this something you'd be interested in taking on? So I kind of jumped in head first, had a crash course, again, kind of looking at it retroactively. It's maybe not the way I would have trained someone, but it was a chance for me to learn in a very hands-on way. So I basically got thrown very quickly in my first job into being the lead person handling the paid media accounts kind of across the board for our clients. So I kind of took it up and ran with it from there, trying to learn everything I could from a couple colleagues that had knowledge in the space, and then really seeking out communities online also where I could learn. After a couple of years of that company, I moved on to another marketing agency locally, where, again, I held a similar role in paid media, but was able to branch out into a few more industries. I worked there for about 5 years, a little over 5 years. And then I joined Clicks Marketing, which is a PPC only agency, all remote. And there I had the chance to start working on some larger accounts. Again, a pretty broad selection of industries, a lot in the SaaS space. So also had a chance to continue to learn and grow there. After about 5 years there, I loved what I did, but was kind of interested in exploring the in-house end of things. So kind of low-key started looking around like, hey, what's out there? Had a recruiter reach out to me from M&T Bank, where I am now, and the conversation just went from there. So now I'm 3 years in, working on a team of paid media experts here at M&T Bank as part of an in-house digital marketing team. So yeah, that's kind of the top level story of how I got to be where I am.
Nice. That's awesome. I guess just to go back to the first couple of roles you talked about there, you mentioned about like being thrown in the deep end and having to sort of just pick it all up, and that not necessarily being the best way to go about it. I'd probably say that's exactly how I learned as well. So it's an interesting idea that whilst you look back and you think, I wouldn't necessarily want anybody else to go through that. Sure, it does give you a lot of skills very quickly, and you have to learn very fast as well.
Yeah, and it's helpful that the industry at large is so supportive. I mean, it still is very much. It's grown a lot since I started out, but particularly when I was starting at that time, there were fewer people in PPC versus SEO, and I'm not engaged too much on that platform anymore on X. But at the time, Twitter, the PPC chat community was pretty active there. And I got to know a lot of people there, learned from a lot of people. That's often where I went first to throw out questions versus even going to the ad platforms themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think X, Twitter, there's still a community on there.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
It feels like LinkedIn maybe has not replaced, but like,
yeah, I feel like a lot of people that I previously connected to a lot in there. Yeah, like you say, there are still some there, but many are a lot more active on LinkedIn now.
yeah, and it's a good point that you're not necessarily by yourself. Like there's this community you can act that, and even more so today, whether it's X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit, and then you've got the LLMs as well, where you can just throw in questions. Not always the best answers, but at least that's the resource. So that's interesting. And then, sorry, not even to mention actually the Slack communities. There's a number of those right now that you can get access to sort of help you out. But I feel like if you're being thrown in the deep end, at least today, you have a lot more, resources at your disposal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that the other thing you mentioned there about it being like car dealership specific in the beginning, like industry specific. Can you talk about what it was like to start off in like a very specific niche and then probably have to broaden out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, auto dealerships in particular are definitely kind of their own beast. They all operate with a very similar model of very aggressive sales tactics. The staff are held to high expectations with how much they have to sell in a short amount of time. But one thing with marketing for exactly the same industry is that to an extent, we were able to reuse some of the same strategies. Obviously would vary with copy, messaging, graphics on some level, but essentially a Chevy dealer in one place, you could kind of transfer over some of your learnings from one to the other. Keywords would be similar, maybe with some location variants thrown in. So again, I mean, it's one niche versus if you're working with a bunch of different industries, every type of campaign, e-com versus lead gen versus a small local business versus enterprise business. There's a lot more to branch out into as to how you use each channel, how you message. Or I think even getting into like SaaS later, the lengthier sales cycles where you might even be going after multiple people in an organization. That's so different from B2C. So yeah, I kind of rambled a bit there, but
yeah, that all makes sense. I think the interesting thing that you mentioned is the performance element and the targeting. Also, the targets, and I wonder if there's an element there of if that's how you start off in paid media, paid search. Like you kind of have to find the ways to get those numbers, make that performance happen very quickly, and that in itself is a great steep learning curve to sort of get the most out of the platform, basically.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Especially, when you have people, you're working with people on your client teams who are very direct in asking questions like, hey, can you answer this? Can you dig this up? So, I would need to figure out, okay, how do we pull this type of reporting? Are we targeting this specific area? Can we pull this? So yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of the first clients I worked on was finance, and it was back when you could target a position, and we used to have calls with the client about moving 0.1 position here and there in different places and keyword bids, and just that level of like granularity and being so tied to performance and the numbers meant that you couldn't really hide. Like you had to know your stuff, and that then hopefully creates a good sort of groundwork to then go further in your career because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I think I was one of the people who was maybe annoyed when they took away being able to see more specifics about position, but now it's kind of like maybe it's a good thing you can't see that, so people don't get too in the weeds over trying to force it. So there's definitely been some give and take where even as the platforms have taken things away, there's still parts of me that came up in a much more manual era that misses it, but then parts of me that realize, hey, we can focus on the bigger strategy picture versus over optimizing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree, but there's parts of me, and I know there's people in the industry who sometimes kicking and screaming away from you got data under control. So
yeah, I've always tended to be the slow person to adapt on some of those things, is to pry my controls away from me. But it is nice to see Google, even with Performance Max, they are gradually adding in a little more control, even over the past year or so. So I think there's maybe some listening going on.
yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So then you mentioned that you were agency side, you'd done that for, I think so, like 3, 4, 5 years, and then you were considering the in-house move. What was the reason for that? What kind of triggered that interest?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually closer to 11 to 12 years between the 3 agencies I was at. So I think I was at the point where, the last agency I was at, treated us very well. I mean, I think we had a good balance there, but I was still kind of getting to the point of realizing you only go so deep when you're working with multiple clients. You jump from one to the next to the next. So I was kind of curious of, what would it be like to actually be embedded in a company and versus dealing with, the marketing contact at the company and then they liaison to the other people. What is it like to actually be directly working side by side with people in these other departments, and then be able to be heads down focused on growing this one brand all the time. So I'd say that was an area that kind of led me to, kind of look around to see what was out there. Part of me at first, I was working with a lot of SaaS businesses at the time. So I looked somewhat in that niche. Obviously ended up elsewhere, which, I love where I am now. But yeah, and I think that has played out, 3 years in, I can see, it is very different. I remember my first couple months there, especially all my colleagues I worked directly with came from an agency previously. So, each person I had a conversation with was telling me, oh, this is so different. And one thing is things move maybe a lot slower than you expect. Our communication happens differently. But, over time I see, you actually get to be a part of those higher level marketing conversations, even where it doesn't relate directly to paid, but you understand maybe a little more of here's why this decision was made or why this ask is happening because you have a direct connection to those people. Or, you need landing page set up or tweak made. You work directly with the team that does that, or, analytics, tagging into things. You work with those people and build relationships with them to get the reporting or, tagging implementation that you need. So, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And that's interesting. I guess that the two things you mentioned there about being able to go deep in one area or on one client and one business is definitely a common consideration versus agency if you're working off yield, clients and being a bit stretched. And then also the speed at which you're working at. So you mentioned like it's a little bit slower versus agency, and that, there's pros and cons to that.
Sure.
I guess what was some of the things you'd expected that turned out to be you were wrong about when you made that move?
Sure. Yeah, good question. I think going back to the slow comment, I think maybe that was something I expected on some level, but didn't fully realize how that would play out. Again, I think that's something that may vary by industry. If you're in-house at a startup it's a small company that just started in the last couple of years, it may be very different where everything's kind of pushed through fast. Working for an enterprise level finance company, just everybody that's been here accepts the fact that it can take weeks or even months to get a campaign off the ground. We have so many pieces moving with assets that need to be designed, approved at multiple levels. Compliance is a big thing in the finance industry where we have to be very strict about what we can say, what we can't say. Anytime there's factors outside of us. Again, on the agency side, I work with a lot of clients where, I love the analytics end of things too. So I was often the person hands-on setting up the tagging and that sort of thing, here just because of, being enterprise level secure environment. We have a team that handles all that. So you need to get in their schedule and get that taken care of. So I think that was a big thing, just realizing how many pieces there are to move things along. And then I think, not again, also something where it was important in the agency end, building relationships with clients and your colleagues and that sort of thing. But in being in-house and especially in a large organization, the importance of relationships there. And again, that's just something that takes time, but understanding, who does what, maybe there's a certain dashboard that you reference for internal data. Who's the person that updates that dashboard? Where does that information come from versus where you're looking at information, learning who those people are to reach out to. So I think that was definitely, maybe a hurdle, but something I've also realized the importance of is, taking the time to make those connections.
Yep. That all makes sense. I think just to play the agency advocate, my mind goes to, well, it sounds like if you worked for an agency that was more integrated in terms of being able to work seamlessly with different departments, and you had a client that engaged with you for, multitude of media channels, analytics, CRO, creative, and you were part of like an integrated team, that feels like it would tick that box a little bit of being able to be one place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the hard part there is that agencies, that's generally what we aim for, but like it's very hard to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I 100% agree. I mean, I think, every business, if they're working on their marketing, they have to figure out what's right for them, what route they go. And I can say the same from being on the agency side. The best clients I had were the ones who connected us beyond just working with the head of marketing or whatever. I would be able to connect directly with their marketing ops person when we needed to, sync Salesforce over, that sort of thing. I think that's a great point. And, an agency that does it well will seek to embed themselves, and a client that wants the relationship to work should make their best effort to do that too.
Yep. So if you're an agency managing lots and lots of different clients, there's definitely a difference, but
Sure.
More integrated, less so, at least from that perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess, how would you view if someone came to you and said, like, I'm trying to weigh up, the opportunity of going in-house or agency, how would you help them sort of come to that decision in terms of what are the key things you need to think about to make that decision?
Sure. If it's somebody, especially newer in the industry, again, it may be confirmation bias on my part because this is the path I took. But I would recommend starting out in an agency. I feel, especially in an agency where you have exposure to a wider range of industries, just naturally, that's maybe an easier way to learn more about how all the channels play together, how different types of marketing might work. If you have a chance maybe to do some with lead gen, some with e-com, maybe some with some larger, some with some smaller clients. Again, not that you can learn very well in-house with the right support. But that's probably where I would start out. Let's say someone's a little further along in their career and they're looking to make a switch to one or the other. Again, I would say, just be aware it is very different. And sometimes it's hard to fully understand that until you've experienced it. So I think, again, maybe taking time to talk with people who are on whichever side you haven't done, trying to vet out the company that you're going into, just to understand that.
Yep. How did you choose? I think you did touch on it, kind of how the route you went into and choosing finance. I think you did mention that, but how did you choose that particular niche?
Sure. Um, I mean, honestly, part of it was, there's a lot of great people. I just happened to be lucky enough to be recruited by them while I was in process of looking. There were a couple other businesses I was looking at in the finance industry at the time. I'd say I had worked with some clients in that niche before, and also, I knew it would be the type of organization that's hopefully fairly stable. Again, not that that's the case everywhere in the finance industry. This is an old thing with an older bank that's, fairly conservative with how they handle their resources and that sort of thing. And also knowing that it would be like the chance to be in a larger organization. So yeah, I think, maybe a few different factors there, but also just what happened to come up at the right place and time when I was looking.
Yeah, which is often the case for
Sure.
career moves. Yeah, awesome. I feel like that's loads of great advice. And I guess to summarize that, to go back to the beginning, like going into the paid media world, try and start agency, get that broader exposure. And if you get thrown in the deep end, like, don't worry too much. It's a great way to learn. You'll look back on it hopefully and be grateful for it. Use the resources that are available, which, there's a lot now. And then I guess, use that time at agency really to learn as much as you can. We didn't really get into like the pros and cons of managing multiple clients, but I guess as long as you've got a part of your career where you are doing that, there's a lot of value to that because you get exposure to multiple industries, lots of different types of clients, different sizes. So there's definitely benefit there. And then later in the career, sort of that sort of weighing up the options of, do I gravitate more to going deeper within a particular business, client? If you're a big agency, that's easier to be integrated as part of a bigger team, or you can go in-house and do that. So that's all really good advice. Thank you. Anything else you'd add on to that?
Yeah, I think one other thing would be, if you do go in-house, but, one thing on the agency side was, I felt like I was maybe naturally keeping on top of updates in the platforms and that sort of thing a little more just when you're working with different types of clients. So, if you're in-house, you might be a little more narrowed in on certain types of campaigns and that sort of thing. So that is something where you maybe need to be a little more active and keeping up with the community, keeping up with publications that are out there. That's one call out of something I found there. But again, there's so many resources out there. And even, in your own time, if you have a chance to play around with setting things up that you aren't working on in your day-to-day, that's helpful.
Yeah, great point. And Search Engine Land, Search Engine Journal, as I mentioned at the top, you contribute yourself, so check those out. And follow you on LinkedIn, follow your updates. There's lots of good people on there. Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Tim. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.